Now, today's topic is stages in spiritual life. In a broader sense, we can say stages or different phases in our spiritual and cultural evolution. That's the implication here. Now, normally in our life, we have three broad concepts. One, our concept of or our idea of the world, or our idea of our own life, what we are living for, and what the world in which we are living actually means to us, how we look upon the world around us, not the physical, phenomenal or empirical universe that we see, but the idea of existence, of life as a whole. This is one important factor in deciding our spiritual or cultural evolution. The second is our idea of our own existence, how we look upon ourselves, or how we want to be seen by others. What is our position, our status in this vast existence, not the physical universe. Because if we compare ourselves with the physical universe, we are very, very insignificant, very irrelevant, we are very tiny. The vastness of the universe, the galaxies, Milky Ways, the planets and stars, all put together constitute a huge, indescribable, unimaginable, vast existence. And in this existence, Earth is a very tiny particle. And we are just one of the 7.2 billion human beings, who again is one of the species of infinite number of species. So, physically, if we look at ourselves, we are totally insignificant. That any scientist will tell you, as much as any philosopher. So what we mean here is how we look upon ourselves, the idea of our existence and life as a whole. Now, this is related to our understanding, our own concept of the universe. So, there is an evolution with regard to human understanding, with regard to human life. And there is an evolution with regard to our understanding of the universe. And at a still higher level, what we consider to be the absolute, paramount, supreme ideal in life very often decides our destiny and our life as a whole. So, well, I shall give an example. Look, think of the world. Now, a most primitive being looks upon the world that he or she is seeing with the 5 senses of perception and mind. The world that we see and when we look around, the world that we see is the only entity for the most primitive person. For them, there is neither a past nor a future, neither yesterday nor tomorrow, only today exists. Which means the body alone exists. The sensory world alone exists. So the whole purpose of human existence is to satisfy the needs of the sensory world. So long as we look upon the physical body as the only entity, we also look upon the physical universe that we see as the only reality. And so long as we look upon the physical world as the only reality, there is neither a past nor a future, neither yesterday nor tomorrow, only the present exists. Because let us have the best of life, best of what nature provides us. This is the most primitive, the grossest level of human evolution. But that's true only for the most primitive people. Those who are happy if they get enough food, enough drinks, a house to live in, and all other sensory pleasures. But then as we evolve further, not necessarily in spiritual life, but even in intellectual life, even in academic pursuits, when we grow further, when we evolve further, we start thinking of the universe in which we are living, and then we are not willing to agree with people who tell that the physical world is the only reality, because the physical world came 13.3 billion years back and will change and will vanish after that period of time, if we believe in modern physics. But anyhow, the world that we are seeing is certainly a fleeting entity. It may live for some billions of years, but still it belongs to time. As much as an insect which lives for a few seconds. An insect or a most insignificant creature in the world may live for a few seconds or minutes. The cosmos, the universe may exist maybe for more than 13 billion years. Both are equally relative, both are equally impermanent, in the sense they come into existence in time, exist in time, and vanish in time. Now, so scientists and thinkers and enlightened philosophers are not willing to accept that the physical world is only reality. But then they are not sure as to what the absolute reality is. Because what the absolute reality is beyond philosophy and beyond physics. It is within the realm of spiritual experience. And so long as we have not reached that level of spiritual evolution, the world is neither permanent, but its illusoriness, its relativity, the fact it is not permanent is not obvious. It is only hypothesis. So the world is indescribable. So at the next stage of human evolution, we look upon the world as indescribable. It is certainly not permanent. No scientist could tell you the world, the universe is a permanent entity. Because if you want to call something permanent, it means it should remain in the same position. It should keep the same status without any change in the past, in the present and future. Then only you can call something as absolutely real. Otherwise it may be real, but real only in a relative sense. So for the enlightened philosopher and scientist, the world is neither permanent, because she knows that it will certainly come to an end, but they are not sure as to what exactly is the absolute reality. So the world is indescribable, which in Vedanta we call it anirvachaniya, means indescribable. Indescribable doesn't mean non-existent or permanent existence. It means something that is beyond our present level of comprehension. That's all. At the third stage of human evolution, and that's the highest stage, the mystic, the one who has realized the unity of the universal and the individual. Jiva Brahma Aikyam, as we call in Sanskrit, the one who has realized the supreme spiritual truth. For such a person, or a mystic, or a saint, this world is just an illusion. Illusion should be understood not as something which is totally non-existent. Illusion doesn't mean total non-existence. But illusion obviously implies something which is certainly not real in the absolute sense. Something which appears to exist for the mystic. Because they realize that behind the fleeting, behind the impermanent entities, there is a permanent, changeless reality which is neither born and which is neither mortal. It is unborn and it is also immortal. It will never vanish. Now, this is the highest stage in spiritual life with regard to human evolution. So, as I said earlier, there are 3 levels at which this evolution is taking place. The evolution at the level of our understanding of the world in which we are living, our own idea of the world or life as a whole or existence as a whole. Because that will reveal our own cultural and spiritual level. So as I said earlier, in a primitive person who looks upon himself as just a physical body and looks upon this world as a play in which he can enjoy to the maximum by whatever means possible. For such a person who is not very different from his counterparts in the animal kingdom, this world alone is the reality and this body is only reality. Physical enjoyments is the only goal. There is neither an yesterday nor a tomorrow, neither a past nor a future, neither God nor spiritual values. The world alone exists for such people. It's the most primitive. Then, as we evolve further, as I said earlier, not necessarily in spiritual life, but even in intellectual pursuit, even in academic pursuit, as we evolve, suddenly, when we reach a level of spiritual or even intellectual evolution, when we may not be able to practice this in our day-to-day life, but we are intellectually convinced that the world as we see is not the only thing that exists. The body is not the only thing that exists. We are something beyond this body. So you need music. You want to go to an art gallery. You want to go to a museum. Or you need ideas. You want to go to library. So you want to know what Shankara or Kant or Hegel or Aristotle taught in ancient times. Otherwise, what's the need of it? Why should you, if a person thinks that body is only reality, food and housing is the only thing required, you need not worry about what Aristotle taught during the pre-Christian times. We need not worry because it's a terrible strain. So, our natural tendency to think beyond, to go beyond the body, is a sign of our spiritual evolution. So scientists have reached that level. That's why some of the greatest enlightened atheists are also great humanists. They would tell you that God doesn't exist. See, God is not great is the title of a well-known book written by perhaps Richard Dawkins, great scientist. Many of the great scientists who are also outstanding humanists would tell you there is no need of a God to interfere in human affairs. We need not go in search of a transcendental origin of morality. That's a term they use. Morality is purely empirical. We need not believe in God or religion to be moral. So that's the idea. They are great humanists. But the very fact that believe in humanism shows that they have gone beyond the physical level of understanding, physical level of evolution. Now, again, when we go beyond the physical level, we reach the intellectual level. But then, as I said, at that level, intellectual level, the world is indescribable because the world cannot be comprehended. World is certainly not the only thing that exists, the physical world. So it becomes undefinable. This is the evolution at the human level. Now, there is also an evolution at the level of our understanding of the absolute supreme ideal for which we live. Call it God if you want. But that's the easiest term that we can use, because God symbolizes not necessarily a creator, one who say an old bearded being living, staying, sitting above the clouds, creating the world in 6 days, supervising. So that is the monotheistic, the normal understanding of God. That is true, but God also is symbolic of a transcendental principle. At the highest level of evolution of the idea of God, we reach a point where we accept all the monotheistic descriptions of God. We don't deny anything. We accept all the great scriptures, the world, whether Upanishads, the Bible, or whatever. We all accept. But then we also admit there is a stage beyond all this. The highest idea of God is the reality which is immanent, residing in all beings. It is also omnipresent, it's all-pervading, it's also transcendental. In fact, that is the only justification for morality in the highest sense of the term. Perhaps I mentioned some time back, there is a verse in the Mandukya Karika, So Siddhanta Vyavasthasu Dvayatino Nischida Dridham Parasparam Viruddhyante Taihi Ayam Na Viruddhyate. You can find the highest concept of morality. The meaning is this. Those who believe that their own path alone is right, believe that their understanding of God alone is the right understanding, their religion is the only true religion, the ideas of God existing in other traditions are wrong, they come into conflict, they come into blows with other people, with followers of other religious traditions. But the most enlightened saint or sage tells you there is no need to fight, there is no need of conflict, because when we transcend, when we go beyond the dualistic understanding of God, then we realize that God, the idea of God at its highest level is the idea of an immanent reality. It is, as I said earlier, all-pervading and also transcendental. So there is no conflict, no difference of views with regard to our highest understanding of God. Now, at this level, there are, we have to enter the field of academic pursuits. Generally speaking, if you look at the different religious traditions of the world, there have been 5 stages in the evolution of our understanding of God. You can't say that the first stage is wrong, the second stage alone is right, or the highest, there is such a thing as the most correct stage. No, there is a stage which gives you a more complete vision of the reality. See, a student who studies something in his 5th standard believes what he studied at the 5th standard is only truth. But when he reaches a higher level of academic pursuit, his knowledge expands and he learns higher things, but he doesn't negate what he learned in the kindergarten. At the highest level, he is still making use of the same fundamental principles of arithmetic or alphabet that he may have studied in the kindergarten. The same alphabet is using for writing. The same figures 1, 2, 3 he may be using at the highest mathematical calculations. So, as we go beyond the earlier stages, we do not negate, we do not say that earlier stages are all wrong. We only say the later stages give you a more complete, rather a less partial vision of the reality. With Swami Vivekananda put it in his own simple term, he said, we are not traveling from error to truth, but we are traveling from truth that is lower, truth that's higher. When Vivekananda used the word truth that is lower, what he meant was a vision of reality which is maybe partial. From that level, we are progressing to a higher vision of reality which is more complete. So from less complete to a more complete understanding of the truth. This is the evolution. To give a clear picture as to how this generally happens, I can just take a very interesting episode from one of our great devotional textbooks. In the 11th book of the great devotional classic, Bhagavata Purana, a sage discusses this point. There are 9 great enlightened sages are paying a visit to a king. The king's name is Shibi. The 9 sages are mentioned in the book Kabir Hari Randariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana Avihotro Damilas Chamasa Karabhajana. I'm not going to give the long list. There are 9 stages that will do for the time being. So they come to this great king, and the king puts them several questions. He asks them how to live in this modern world, what are the spiritual ideas to be practiced, how to go through different stages in spiritual life, as we are, that's a subject of discussion here. But in one context, the king puts a question: who is the most and the best enlightened spiritual person in this world? And who are those who belong to the lower level and also those who belong to the intermediary level? Now, in answer to this, one of the sages, Antariksha, that's a name, he answers the first question. The question is, who is the most enlightened and the most spiritually evolved person? Now, this answer reveals 2 aspects of human evolution. The highest concept of the absolute reality or God, because that also reflects the spiritual stature of the seeker. Bible says God created man in his own image, but it is also true that man or woman creates God in her or his own image. Because our understanding of God, our concept of the absolute reality, the supreme ideal for which we are living, very much reveals our own spiritual evolution. So those who believe that money alone is the only thing to be had in life, they will sacrifice everything for money. And so on. Just to give you an example. Those who want to do philanthropic activity, those who beyond money, well, I want to get a good name, I should help others, but my name should appear in the newspapers. Perhaps I should be recognized by the Red Cross or some United Nations or UNESCO or some international bodies who recognize great philanthropists. So I should get also recognition, but they are certainly far superior to those who do nothing. But the highest are those who do all these, but still don't care for any kind of recognition. So there are different levels of evolution. Now, the sage Antariksha, he answers. He says, the Sanskrit verse is this. I shall give a detailed description. Sarva bhudeshu ye pasyed bhagavad bhavam atmanaha bhudani bhagavadi atmani esha bhagavadottamaha. The greatness of this verse is it contains the highest Advaitic non-dualistic principle. The one who sees, the one who experiences the presence of God in all beings in this world, and the one who experiences the presence of the whole creation in God, he is the most highly evolved spiritual seeker. The one who not just believes but experiences, every moment experiences the presence of God in all beings and the presence of the whole creation in God is the most highly evolved spiritual seeker. That is the answer which Antariksha gives. So, for such a spiritual seeker, every act is an act of worshipping God. So you need not go to a church or a place of worship or a temple or anywhere to really worship God. But then you will not reject all these paths. There is no rejection. The point is, our spiritual life need not be and should not be confined to mechanical performance of conventional religious rituals. Conventional religious rituals have got an important place in spiritual life because that will keep us engaged in some activities which are ennobling. But at the same time, we should be able to see the presence of God outside the temple, outside the church. And we should be able to practice spirituality outside the meditation room. That means the secular and spiritual merge into one. This is the answer which the great sage gives, Antariksha. Sarva bhudeshu pasyed, which means the one who not just believes but feels the presence, experiences the presence of God in all beings, and the one who experiences the presence of the whole creation in God. I mean, the line of demarcation between God and creation vanishes. For such a person, spirituality becomes a matter of 24 hours a day, 7 days of the week, and 30 or 31 days of the year, of the month. It becomes an integral whole. The secular and the spiritual merge into one. Every act becomes an act of worship. Every thought becomes an act of meditation. And the whole universe becomes a temple or a church, a place of worship. Now, this is also the highest principle of humanism, spiritual humanism. One interesting aspect of this highest stage of spiritual life is that it looks upon the believers and non-believers with equanimity. And it takes you away from religion. It takes you to the level of spirituality, because spirituality is universal. Religion could be universal when it evolves into the level of spiritual experience. But very often it doesn't, and it did not happen in most of the religious traditions. So, in ancient times, the great sage says the one who has reached this highest level of spiritual humanism is the most highly evolved spiritual seeker. I'm not going to the other two stages because we don't have enough time. I want to give the highest. There are two other stages mentioned in the same context. Antariksha says those who have not reached this highest stage of spiritual level should constantly strive, work hard to reach that level. And during the period of the preparation, the seeker should exercise wisdom, a strong discerning mind, should get himself or herself acquainted with spiritual ideas, should enrich those spiritual ideas, and gradually evolve from a gross to a subtle level of spiritual evolution. From many to one, from gross to subtle, from external to internal, and from conventional religiosity towards universal spiritual experience. This is mentioned here. Now, very often our normal understanding of activities, our normal activities are guided by certain do's and don'ts, as we call it. I can just give one interesting episode from the author of this great work. His name was Vyasa. Now, Vyasa was a grand scholar, great sage of ancient times, and he wrote many dozens of outstanding works describing high metaphysics, high spiritual ideas, and so on, in a general way. Now, it so happened that still he was suffering from some kind of inner grief. He could not enjoy the inner bliss that naturally comes to a spiritually enlightened philosopher. So one day he was sitting in a pensive mood on the bank of a river. Then another sage happens to come there. His name was Narada, the great sage of ancient times. And he asked this question to the great philosopher, writer. You are an accomplished scholar, a saint and sage. But still, you don't seem to be very happy. You don't seem to be contented. Very often it happens, when we achieve a lot of things, writing great books, when we become ourselves spiritually enlightened to some extent, we feel a kind of accomplishment in life. In fact, it's called an ideal of achievement, self-achievement. Gives some satisfaction. Great thinkers. But those who are still more evolved will feel an emptiness within. This comes to all people who are genuine seekers of the highest spiritual experience. In fact, this divine discontent, this divine dissatisfaction, the spiritual dissatisfaction is the mother of all great spiritual experiences. All great mystics had to go through this stage of an inner discontentment, dissatisfaction. In fact, that was the turning point in their life. You think of St. Francis of Assisi, who was a soldier, son of a rich man. All that, these incidents are very common in the lives of those who reach the highest spiritual level. Those who do not belong to the highest level of spiritual inquiry, evolution, they will be happy if they accomplish some great things like writing an outstanding book, becoming a well-known academic, scientist, philosopher, a philanthropist. They'll be very happy. More or less, they will have some level of happiness. But they belong to the second level of spiritual seekers. those who belong to the highest level still have a sense of unhappiness, a lurking unhappiness within. So very often spiritual seekers will come, and we have been reading religious books, practicing meditation, doing good things, still we feel unhappy. Now that unhappiness doesn't mean that spiritually you are bankrupt. In fact, unless we evolve to a level of spiritual growth, we can never have this inner dissatisfaction. The feeling of inner emptiness, inner voidness is the clearest sign that we are spiritually evolving. An animal never complains. You give it enough food, it's perfectly happy. Human beings who belong to that level also very happy. But those who are spiritually evolved, but not necessarily reach the highest level of evolution, feel a lurking dissatisfaction within, an inner emptiness or voidness within, something lacking somewhere. Reading the Gospel or Sri Ramakrishna or the Bible or any religious scripture every day, meditating in a church or a temple every day, doing good things to others, leading a good life, still something is missing somewhere. It is this feeling of inner voidness which converted ordinary people into great mystics, because this is the beginning of the highest spiritual experience. Now that was the stage through which Vyasa was going. That was stage Vyasa was going through, as I mentioned earlier. He had written all the great outstanding books of those days. Brahma Sutra, editing of the Vedas, all the great mythological books known as Puranas, and he is the author of Mahabharata, which contains Bhagavad Gita. So you can imagine he was certainly not an ordinary person who had reached a very high level of accomplishment in intellectual pursuits and also in spiritual evolution. Unless you are spiritually inclined, you cannot spend your whole lifetime for writing great spiritual work, classics. Still the man was unhappy. And he was sitting on the bank of river Saraswati in a pensive mood. At that time, another sage comes to the scene. So he asked the question, why are you unhappy, though you have accomplished so much in your life? Vyasa didn't reply. And again Narada persisted, the great sage. Then Vyasa replied, well, I have done so much. And many people, many great spiritual seekers have been benefited reading my books. But I am myself feeling an inner emptiness within. Sometimes we feel, our minds appears to be divided into two warring camps, each in conflict with the other. That was the stage Vyasa was going through. Then Narada replied, well, you have written great books, no doubt. You have written great philosophical books. But have you addressed the problem of human spiritual aspiration? Have you clearly pointed out what a spiritual seeker should do to face a crisis in their life? The Vyasa said, well, perhaps that was the point which I missed all through. Then Narada said, now you try to write something focusing on what a spiritual seeker should do, ought to do, when he or she is facing a crisis in life. And in response to this instruction, Vyasa wrote Mahabharata. Mahabhagavata it is called. Bhagavata Purana is a great spiritual devotional classic. It was written by Vyasa in response to this instruction given by the sage Narada. I shall just give an outline of how this book begins, because in a way it is a great beginning of a great book. In fact, the beginning contains the end, the the final conclusion of the book in the same context. There was an ancient king, Parikshit. He was a great man. In a way, he was related to. He was the. He belongs to the same lineage of Arjuna, who is one of the participants in the dialogue in Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita was instructed by Krishna to Arjuna. Now, his name was King Parikshit. Now, this man was highly enlightened, very powerful, very wise king. But somewhere something went wrong with him. One day he was hunting in a forest, and he was very hungry and thirsty and tired. He entered a hermitage. Inside he found an old sage meditating. He didn't recognize the king because he was deeply immersed in meditation. But the king mistook him to be an arrogant old man who didn't show any hospitality because he was hungry and thirsty. So the king, though he was an enlightened person, sometimes in some unguarded movements, people do terrible things. That was what he did at that time. He looked around, found a dead snake, took the snake and put it on the sage's neck as a garland, something like a garland, and went away. After some time, I am trying to put in a brief, as briefly as possible, the whole story. After some time, the sage's young son came. He found his father, old man, immersed in meditation with a dead snake around his neck. So that boy, who was also a man of great spiritual powers, he cursed the king, whoever must have committed this heinous crime. He'd be dead in 7 days, and he'll be bitten by a poisonous snake, the great snake Takshaka. That's the story goes. When the old sage opened his eyes and came to know what his young son had done, the impertinent boy, cursing the king, the sage became very, very sad. And he scolded the boy, tried to correct him, and he sent a messenger and emissary to the king to inform of what happened, because when the little boy who had done so much of penance and meditation, spiritual practices, when he says something, it will happen. So the sage sent word to the king, and Parikshit, when he heard this incident, the young boy had cursed him and he was going to die in 7 days, 7 into 24 hours. He didn't get angry because he was a wise man. Well, I did something wrong, so I deserved this fate. Now, he didn't get angry. What he did? Now, what will you do, or what will a normal man do if he suddenly happens to know that he has only 7 days to live? An ordinary person who lives, the world alone is real, body alone is real. He will withdraw all the money from the bank, go to some resorts and squander away all the money. That's what he will do. Another person may collapse. He may fall unconscious out of grief and shock. This king, this wise king, was an enlightened person. So what he did, he wanted to spend the rest of his lifetime, 7 days, 7 into 24 hours, in constant contemplation of God, the supreme spiritual ideal. So he left his kingdom, left his palace, and decided to go to the banks of river Ganga, which is a holy river of ancient India, even now. When this news spread, the great spiritual aspirants of those days, spiritual seekers of those days, they all came to the banks of the river bank, where the king had decided to sit on meditation without food or drink. So only 7 days are left. So why should I give anything to this body which committed a terrible crime, putting the dead snake around the neck of a sage who is immersed in meditation? So he came and he decided to spend the rest of his lifetime, 7 days, on meditation on God. Now, among the saints and sages who had assembled there was another great saint who was Shuka. His name is Shuka. He is the exponent of the spiritual instructions in Bhagavata Purana. Shuka also came. Now, Shuka was the greatest sage, the most well-known saint of those days. So when he himself appeared, King Parikshit, who was sitting in meditation, who had decided to spend the rest of his lifetime in contemplation of God, supreme ideal, he puts some questions to Shuka. The questions are this. He begins, what should a dying man do? What he should not do? Atha prachami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusasyeha yadkaryam mriyamanasya sarvata. Simple. See, mriyamanasya purusasya yadkaryam. Sanskrit means, what should a person whom death is staring at him do? If death is staring on your face, you are confronting death in front of you. What should you do? What should a person who is sure that he was going to leave this world in 7 days, what should he do? This is the question. And he continues, Yasodhavyam adhojapyam yad kartavyam nirviprabho smartavyam bhajaneyam va bruhi yadva viparyam. I am not going to details, but I will explain. What should he chant? Whom he should meditate upon? What all he should do? And again, what he should not do? He or she. These two questions are very important. What a person whom death is staring at his face should do and should not do. In answer to this, Shuka begins his instruction in the 2nd chapter of the 1st book. And he says, by any means, you should try to prepare to leave this world with the remembrance of God in your heart. This is possible by many means. That's what Shuka says. Edavan Sankhya Yogabhyam Swadharma Parinishtaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. The Sanskrit Ante Narayana Smriti means remembering God at the last moment. Which is possible only for those who have done good things, because when you are facing the last moment, you cannot be a diplomat. You may be the best trained diplomat in the world, but whatever your natural instincts are will come to the forefront. See, if you ask the question, how are you? Fine. You may have lurking stomach pains. You say fine. But when the mind is out of your control, when the senses are out of your control, whatever you feel will come to the surface. Because very often in human behavior, there is a thin screen between the real and the appearance, between what is within and what appears outside. But when the mind is totally out of your control, when the senses of perception are totally out of your control, the natural accumulated ideas, tendencies and memories will come to the surface. So if a person wants to leave this world with a smile on the face, as you are moving from one room to another room, as Sri Ramakrishna says in the Gospel, that's a journey of the enlightened person, without worry, without problem. If a person really wants to face the death as a creative crisis, not as a disaster, he should lead his life intelligently. Because life is not a pessimistic, I'm not giving a pessimistic picture of life. This is the most optimistic picture that one can ever think of for life. Because life also should be a logical and intelligent preparation for going beyond the physical existence. Because life doesn't end with the end of the physical body. It is only a semicolon. It is not a full stop. So what happened? The life continues. So the great sage Shuka says, Etavan Sankhya Yogabhyam Swadharma Parinishthaya. So you can either practice by surrendering all your actions, everything to God, or you can concentrate on the immanent, omnipresent, all-pervading, transcendental reality, which is Atman, which is universal, or you can look upon every act of yours as an act of worship, which is Karma Yoga. Whole life becomes a spiritual practice if you look upon all our activities as an act of worship. So worship extends beyond the temple and beyond the church and beyond the worship room and beyond the 2-3 hours that we normally spend for meditation as a ritual. So Shuka says, this is the path for the intelligent man or intelligent woman to live in this world. The way to live in this world intelligently. Live in this world, but remember, this world is not the whole of reality. It is only an iceberg. This body is, the tip of the iceberg, not the whole of iceberg. This life, this body, this world is only the tip of the iceberg. Very often, only a minute part of the iceberg is seen above the water level. The rest of the iceberg is below the water level. So, if one could prepare life intelligently, then life itself becomes fully accomplished in the true sense of the term, in the spiritual sense. That helps us to make our whole life a spiritual practice, to turn our whole existence into spiritual practice. So the secular and the spiritual merge into one integral whole. That's the answer which the great sage gives to the king. You have to remember, the king was not angry and not depressed, not shocked, not sad when he heard the terrible news. Rather, it became a cause for his spiritual evolution. And as a result, we got a great spiritual classic, Bhagavad Gita. Thank you. Namaskar.